Just when you thought CIG couldn't make any further surprising claims, they come out and start talking about the release of Star Citizen. Now keep in mind, this isn't me making a speculation on a wishy-washy statement. Nope, instead this is something far more definitive. CIG have, for the first time, literally and concretely begun to talk about the release version of the game, which they're calling Star Citizen 1.0. So for those of you who've been following Star Citizen for quite a while now, you'll be aware that once a year, Chris Roberts releases a letter from the chairman. So this is generally a summary of what's been going on throughout the year, and we're not going to get into that in this particular video, because what we want to talk about is Star Citizen 1.0, what's CIG's take on this. So we're going to skip over all of this, and do read it if you want to, but I'm actually going to look at the part further down. What's particularly interesting if we get further down this post is a discussion about what's coming in the year ahead. Well, to start with, they touch on Squadron 42, and we know that at this point that Squadron 42 is feature complete. They announced that back in CitizenCon at the end of last year. What they're going to move towards this year is being content complete, and that means they're starting to work towards the finishing line and therefore the final release of the game. But that is relevant to Star Citizen. How? Well, it turns out that, as we know, much of the content that was developed for Squadron 42 is going to be integrated and moved over to Star Citizen. And now that the teams are essentially finished on developing the features for Squadron 42, many of them can start moving over to Star Citizen. And that means that the teams are preparing to deliver server meshing and expanding the universe of Star Citizen to multiple star systems. Now obviously, as with any letter from the chairman, this is, well, primarily PR. It's definitely a marketing release, so we kind of have to skip through some of the bullshit here, some of the BS, and really get down to the nitty-gritty. And that means skipping past a lot of this and really focusing on what does this mean for the future of the game. What are they saying for specifically? Of course, don't get me wrong, I'm not for 1 minute saying that you shouldn't read the rest of this letter. I'm just saying that, well, for the purpose of this video, I really want to focus on the information that is pertinent to the release of Star Citizen. And much of this isn't really directly relevant. But that said, if you do want to read the full letter, do go ahead and do so, and I'll make sure to link it in the video description. Well, the next update for Star Citizen is patch 323, and this apparently is going to be a big deal, so they say. What this means apparently in short is that it's a big milestone for Star Citizen and will allow them to start moving from the simulation and the replication layers towards the actual development of Star Citizen itself as a game. And this is where version 4 of Star Citizen comes in. We all know that version 4 is going to introduce Pyro, which is a completely brand new star system that's currently available in testing at the moment but hasn't been released onto the live servers, not yet at least. You get to Pyro through the jump gate, and that has been successfully tested. Ultimately, the idea is that different star systems will exist on different game servers, and the new tech, the server meshing tech, is going to allow players to jump seamlessly between different game servers, and that is a pretty important thing. Essentially, they'll be able to, well, essentially the more game servers you've got, the more players you can have in any one area. Because ultimately, what CIG are trying to achieve here is something fairly unique. They want unique servers that are dedicated to entire planets and moons, and ones that focus solely on landing zones and other key locations. In short, they're bringing Star Citizen towards a full MMO environment, something that, despite what some people may feel at the moment, Star Citizen isn't currently. They're essentially saying here they want to make Star Citizen a fully fledged game. So again, we got a lot of marketing speak here, really CIG kind of emphasizing how much of an important point this is. An inflection point is the word they use. So yeah, really what I'm trying to do is drill down into this and distill the important key points outside of all the marketing speech. So what they're saying here, and this is where the key point is that whilst we recognise there's no definitive finish line for an MMO, what they're working towards is Star Citizen 1.0. It's what they consider to be and this is a very important point, the features and content set to really represent the commercial release. And this is the very important point in my mind, the commercial release. So that means a state of play, a state of the game that is no longer alpha or early access. These are all very key points here. This is all very concrete I don't think this is wishy-washy. CIG and Chris Roberts are drawing a line in the sand here, dictating, that the current version of Star Citizen is indeed alpha or early access, and they want to work towards a commercial release. But what does that mean? Well, if we go a little bit further down, we've got another message here from Rich Tyra, who is a senior game director. He's going to be working alongside Chris Roberts. It's this guy over here. He's going to be working alongside Chris Roberts to finally get Star Citizen into a finally fully released state. Kind of seems to me that, I wouldn't say Chris Roberts has been slacking. We all know that he likes to keep adding additional features. And it seems to me, my personal opinion here, is that Rich is coming in to try and rein things in a bit, try and get things finally on track to make sure that the game is going to be released. And he says here that, just to be clear, 100% clear, that this doesn't mean going back to the drawing board or totally changing the vision of what Star Citizen currently is. What they do want to do is create a roadmap that takes them all the way up to version of 1.0. And yes, it's very strange here that CIG don't seem to be able to count, because obviously they're in version 3.23 that's about to release very soon. They've also mentioned version 4.0 earlier on in this post. Keep in mind that these are all alpha builds. What they're working towards here is a full and a final release of 1.0. So they've been working on a roadmap that outlines all the features and the content that they need. But he says, just as crucially, and I think this is something that's aimed at the community, this is expectation management. They're working on features that will come post-full release. In other words, not everything that they've been announcing, not everything that they announced since the days of the Kickstarter is going to be available in version 1.0. In fact, many of these features will come further down the road. So some people will perhaps be happy to hear that, other people less so. Obviously, it means that, there's a lot of different features that CIG have promised, and there's no way that they can keep promising additional features and also reach the 1.0 fully released milestone. At some point, they've got to draw that line in the sand that we've mentioned and decide this is the release state of Star Citizen. So this really comes back to the point that we touched on earlier, that essentially CIG are moving teams away from Squadron 42, in this case action featured teams and vehicle featured teams, whatever that actually means, are moving them on towards more generic gameplay teams. That should allow us to be a lot more flexible and shoulder some of the heavier burdens of those teams that they used to carry. In other words, building up more features that are needed for Star Citizen. This will allow them to bring over existing Squadron 42 features into Star Citizen. And this will mean things eventually like working on brand new features such as base building and crafting. And this is going to help round out the 1.0 experience. So whilst obviously here they're not talking about any release date, they're not even giving any concrete release window, what they are doing is using a very specific language that we've not seen from CIG in the past. And this language is talking about the 1.0 experience, the release version of Star Citizen. Now, I don't expect this to happen anytime soon. I'm not expecting it to happen this year, and maybe it won't even happen in 2025. But it's clear that's what's going on here, is that there's been a shift inside of CIG, and this is likely a fundamental shift that's moving them away from the idea of working on a constant alpha build towards a more solid build, culminating, they say, in what we refer to as Star Citizen 1.0. And they're going to be sharing more about this in the coming year, the plan to actually get in there. So some of you, I'm sure, will interpret this as being suitably vague. And yeah, I think that's a completely reasonable approach on this. It's a completely reasonable take. Really, from my perspective, I'll believe it when I see it. But either way, whatever way you cut it, one thing is for certain. This is completely the first time that CIG have concretely addressed the release of Star Citizen. It's the very first time they've spoken openly and publicly about Star Citizen 1.0. And whilst they're not giving any release dates or release windows yet, I really do think it shows a change in approach and direction as to how CIG want to really start publishing and working on Star Citizen. Or perhaps more to the point, perhaps another way of looking at it is that they want to try and change the narrative and the perspective surrounding the game. I mean, at this point, Star Citizen has been in development since 2012, 2011, according to some people, depending on how you look at it. And that's a very, very long time. And even if Star Citizen is still another 2 years out, that's going to put it at nearly 15 years in development. Ultimately then, Star Citizen does have a certain narrative around it outside of the hardcore Star Citizen circles, and at some point, just maybe, CIG are going to need to start addressing all of that. So yeah, there's a couple of ways we could look at this. Star Citizen is on its way to release at some point in the not too distant future, fingers crossed, hopefully, if CIG is being genuine and honest here and what they're saying is anything to go by. Alternatively, they could be trying to spin a bit of a new narrative, trying to change the public perception of the ongoing development. Personally, I'm thinking it's a bit more of the former rather than the later, but it could also be a mix of both. Either way, do let me know what you think about all of this in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you. Meanwhile, why not check out the other video on the screen right here? I'll catch you all next time. Take care.